The cup made no sound when she set it down. That was the particular skill of it. The saucer meeting the mahogany without the faintest click, the tea arriving at the precise temperature he preferred, the milk already stirred in the quantity he never remembered telling anyone. She had learned it in her first week. By her third month, it was involuntary, the way a musician's fingers find the keys without sight. By her sixth month, she could have done it in darkness. He did not look up. He was reading a letter, as he always was at this hour. His thumb pressed the crease flat against the desk, and his mouth, she noticed these things, could not train herself to stop, moved faintly over certain phrases as though tasting them. The morning light from the east-facing window caught the edge of the page, and she saw her own handwriting reflected in miniature across the surface of his tea before the ripples settled and swallowed it. She stepped back. She folded her hands. She left the study with the same measured tread she had used every morning for a year, and he did not look up from the letter, and she did not expect him to. That was the arrangement. Emmeline Lacey had not come to Kellingham Hall to deceive anyone. She had come because the position was offered, and the alternative was the slow, polite starvation that attended a clergyman's daughter with no surviving family and an education too thorough for the posts she could respectably fill. She was not a housemaid. Mrs. Ord, the housekeeper, had recognized that within hours of her arrival and had quietly reassigned her, away from the scullery, away from the laundry, into the peculiar role of attending the Duke's private study and morning routine. It was Mrs. Ord's invention. There was no established title for it. The other staff called her the study girl when they thought she could not hear, and she did not correct them, because the role afforded her something that no other position in the house could have: proximity to the man she had been writing to for 4 months before she ever crossed his threshold. The correspondence had begun through Lady Staverton, a woman of 63 who had outlived 2 husbands and replaced matrimony with the arrangement of other people's intellectual lives. She called it her letter circle, a rotation of anonymous correspondence matched by the temperament, interest, and the quality of their prose. Lady Staverton believed, with the fervor of a Methodist preacher, that the truest form of human connection was written, unsigned, and stripped of every advantage that birth and beauty conferred. She was possibly correct. The letters passed through her hands. She read none of them, or claimed she did not, with the identities of both parties sealed. Emmeline had joined the circle at the suggestion of her father's old friend, Reverend Astley, who happened to be a distant cousin of the Duke, and who happened to mention, in a conversation Emmeline was not meant to overhear, that the Duke of Kellingham was the most isolated man he had ever known. That detail did not matter to Emmeline at the time. She wanted someone to talk to. She had buried her father in November, sold the rectory furnishings in December, and by January had nothing left but her books, her handwriting, and an anger at the world that she had not yet learned to call grief. Her first letter to the anonymous correspondent was 6 pages long and concerned the migration patterns of Arctic terns. His reply was 4 pages and corrected 2 of her sources while admitting she was right about the third. By the 5th exchange, they had moved from ornithology to moral philosophy. By the 8th, to music. By the 12th, he confessed that he had not spoken more than 40 words to anyone in his household that week, and that her letters were the only evidence he had that his mind still functioned. She confessed that she read his letters in the bath because it was the only room with a lock, and that she sometimes laughed aloud at his marginalia, which startled the cat. By the 20th letter, she was in love. She did not name it. She did not need to. It sat in her chest like a second heartbeat, steady and inconvenient. When the position at Kellingham was secured through a registry that Mrs. Ord maintained with a linen merchant's wife in Harrogate, Emmeline did not know whose household she was entering. She learned it on her first morning, when Ridley the steward mentioned the Duke's name in passing, Hugh Astley, Duke of Kellingham, and the floor shifted beneath her and did not shift back. She knew the name Astley, Reverend Astley's cousin, the most isolated man he had ever known. She almost left that afternoon. She had her coat half-buttoned and her small trunk pulled from beneath the bed before she asked herself what precisely she would be fleeing from. He did not know her. She did not know him, not the man who lived in this house with its cold corridors and uncurtained windows. She knew the person who wrote letters about tern migration and moral philosophy and the particular melancholy of Handel's Largo played in an empty room. That person might or might not be the Duke of Kellingham. The two might coexist without ever meeting. She unbuttoned her coat. She pushed the trunk back. She went downstairs and learned how he took his tea. The trouble, she understood this later, in the way that one understands a wound only after the swelling begins, was that they were the same man. Every observation in his letters appeared in the flesh. His habit of standing at windows and looking out without seeing. His preference for silence that was occupied rather than empty. The way he turned pages, she had read him describe this in a letter, the compulsion to finish a paragraph even when interrupted, the thumb holding the place, and then watched him do it over the translation of Herodotus he kept in the study, and the recognition was so complete that she had to leave the room. He did not notice her leaving. He rarely noticed her at all. She was furniture. She was the mechanism by which tea appeared at 8:30, and the fire was laid by 7, and the inkwell was filled, and the curtains drawn to the precise angle he preferred without knowing he preferred it. He spoke to her occasionally. "Thank you," or "not today." When she brought the afternoon tray, he sometimes declined, and his voice, when directed at her, carried the amiable indifference of a man addressing a reliable clock. She was a function, not a person. In his letters, she was everything. "I find myself composing replies to you during the hours when no letter has arrived," he wrote in February, 5 months after her arrival. "This is either the sign of a mind that has found its proper correspondent or the early stage of a madness I should welcome. I suspect both." She wrote back the same evening, sitting in her small room above the kitchen with the ink she purchased from the village stationer and the paper she could barely afford, her hand forming the words that would pass through Lady Staverton's hands and arrive at this same house, delivered by the same post she sorted each morning, placed on the same desk where she set his tea. The circularity of it struck her sometimes as comic and sometimes as unbearable. "You are not mad," she wrote, "or if you are, I am equally afflicted, and we shall simply have to be mad in parallel." He kept that letter. She knew because she saw it, refolded and tucked inside the Herodotus, the following morning while she was straightening his desk. She stood with her fingers on the spine of the book and felt the paper's edge beneath the leather cover and thought very clearly, "I cannot do this much longer." But she could. She did. The months accumulated. Spring turned to summer, and the gardens at Kellingham, which she tended in her free hours with the head gardener's permission, began to recover from a decade of neglect. The Duke walked past them occasionally, and once she heard him remark to Ridley that someone had planted larkspur along the south wall and that it was well done. He did not ask who. She was standing 12 feet away, her hands still dark with soil, and he looked through her the way light passes through gauze, aware of a presence, indifferent to its particulars. In his letters, he described the larkspur. "Someone has been at work in the grounds," he wrote. "I cannot discover who. But the south wall, which was bare limestone for years, now carries a run of blue that catches the afternoon light, and I find myself walking that way more often than I intend. Whoever planted it understood the aspect perfectly." She read this letter at 6:30 the following morning, standing in the kitchen corridor with her shawl drawn tight and her breath visible in the early chill, and she pressed her forehead against the stone wall and closed her eyes and felt the full weight of her situation settle on her like a hand. He was falling in love with her. Both of her. The woman who wrote and the woman who planted and the woman who understood how he took his tea. They were all the same woman, and he was falling in love with each of them separately without knowing they were one. The ache of it was specific. Not that he could not see her, but that he could in fragments, and chose each fragment without recognizing the whole. There was an evening in July, she would remember it afterward as the evening the distance almost closed, when she was clearing the supper things from the small dining room, and he came in unexpectedly, having forgotten a book he had left on the sideboard. The candles had been reduced to 2. The room was warm and half dark, and smelled of beeswax and the remnants of a meal he had eaten alone, as he ate every meal. She was holding a stack of plates, and he was reaching for the book, and their hands nearly touched across the table, and he looked at her. Not through her. At her. For perhaps 3 seconds, the full weight of his attention rested on her face, and she saw him register something. Surprise, perhaps, or a flicker of curiosity, the faintest suggestion that the woman standing before him was not quite the blank surface he had assumed. His lips parted as though he were about to speak. The candlelight caught the edge of his jaw, and she thought, absurdly, of a line from his most recent letter. I wonder sometimes what your face looks like when you read my words, and whether your expression changes the way your prose does, from careful to unguarded, between one paragraph and the next. Then the footman entered with a tray, and the Duke stepped back, and the moment dissolved like sugar in hot water, completely, irretrievably, and he took his book and left. She stood in the darkened dining room for some minutes afterward, holding the plates, breathing. He wrote to her the following morning. I had a strange experience last evening, the letter said. I was retrieving a volume from the dining room and saw one of the household staff in the candlelight, and for a moment, I cannot explain this without sounding fanciful, I had the sensation of recognizing someone I had never met. It passed, these things pass, but I mention it because I have come to trust you with the thoughts I cannot explain to myself, and this one has lingered. She read the letter standing at the kitchen window. She read it twice. She folded it with steady hands and placed it in the pocket of her apron and carried it against her body for the rest of the day. This letter, in which he described seeing her without seeing her, recognizing her without recognition, and she thought, this cannot hold. The seams are showing. The two halves of her life in this house were pressing against each other like tectonic plates, and eventually one would give. It did not give, not yet. She was careful. She kept her handwriting confined to her room, purchased different ink from what was stocked in the study, ensured that nothing she wrote in her letters could be traced to anything she said aloud in the household. The precautions were exhausting. Some mornings she woke already tired in the particular way of a person who has maintained a performance so long that the performance has become indistinguishable from the self, and she could no longer remember which version of her was the real one, the woman who wrote with candor and wit and the full force of her intelligence, or the woman who set down a teacup and left a room without speaking. Mrs. Ord knew something was wrong. The housekeeper had survived 30 years of service across 4 great houses and had developed the capacity to read a household the way a barometer reads weather. She watched Emmeline set the morning tray with hands that trembled faintly, watched her leave the study with a composure that was held rather than felt, and one evening in October, she sat down beside her in the servants' hall and said without preamble, "If it has become too much, I can reassign you." "It has not become too much," Emmeline said. "I did not ask whether you could bear it," Mrs. Ord replied. "I asked whether you should have to." Emmeline looked at her for a long moment. "A little longer," she said. "A little longer, and then I shall know what to do." What she meant was, he had written in his most recent letter that he wished to meet, not immediately, not rashly, but the correspondence had reached a depth that made anonymity feel less like freedom and more like concealment, and he was careful with the word, she could see him choosing it, to know her. She had not replied. 3 days passed. 4. On the 5th day, he wrote again, "Your silence is unlike you. If I have overstepped, say so, and I will withdraw the suggestion and never raise it again. But if your silence is hesitation rather than refusal, I would ask you to consider that I have never asked anything of you before, and I'm asking now not from curiosity, but from something I find I cannot adequately name in a letter, which is perhaps the very reason we should no longer confine ourselves to them." She sat with this letter for an hour. She sat with it through the kitchen supper she did not eat, and the evening rounds she performed by habit, and the long, still period after the house settled, when she could hear the wind in the chimney stacks, and the distant sound of the Duke's footsteps in the corridor above her room, pacing as he did on nights when sleep would not come. Then she wrote her reply. "I cannot meet you," she wrote, "not because I do not wish to, but because I fear that what you have built of me in your mind is finer than anything I could be in a room. You know me at my best, composed, considered, given time to choose my words. In person, I am smaller than my letters. I am ordinary in ways that a page conceals, and I could not bear to see the moment when you understood that." She posted it the following morning. She watched it leave with the outgoing correspondence. She set his tea at 8:30, and his hand was resting on the desk beside the Herodotus, and for the first time in a year, his fingers were still. His reply came 3 days later. It was the shortest letter he had ever sent, 4 lines, written in a hand that was less controlled than usual, the ink heavier, as though he had pressed the nib into the paper with the force of something held back. "You are wrong about yourself, but I will not argue it. If you wish to remain as you are to me, a voice, a mind, a presence I carry into every room, then I will accept that, and I will be grateful for it, and I will not ask again." She read it in the kitchen corridor at 6:30, and she pressed her palm flat against the page, and she made a decision. She would end the correspondence, not because she did not love him, because she did, and the love had become a corridor with no doors. It led forward into revelation and backward into loss and sideways into the unbearable present, and she could see no version of the future that did not require one of them to grieve. If she told him, he would feel deceived. If she did not, she would spend every morning setting down a cup of tea for a man who loved her and did not know it, and the quiet cruelty of that, to herself, to him, was more than she could justify. Her final letter was 3 pages. She did not explain. She said that the correspondence had given her more than she had any right to expect, and that she wished him the happiness she believed he deserved, and that she hoped he would forgive her for withdrawing from something she valued more than anything she possessed. She signed it the way she always had, without a name, with a small drawing of a wren she had used as her mark from the beginning, her father's old joke that she sang best when no one was looking. The morning after the letter arrived, she brought his tea and found the study door closed. This was unusual. She knocked, silence, and set the tray outside the door and returned to the kitchen and stood at the window with her hands in the basin of cold water and did not move for some time. He did not emerge until noon. Ridley reported that the Duke had canceled his afternoon appointments. Mrs. Ord reported that the Duke's luncheon tray had been returned untouched. The household moved around the closed study door the way water moves around a stone, and Emmeline felt each report like a small blade drawn across the surface of her resolve. The second day was worse. She brought the morning tray and found the study door open, but the curtains drawn, all of them, the full bank of east-facing windows shut against the light he had always preferred. The room smelled of cold candle wax and the particular staleness of air that has not been disturbed. His desk was disordered in a way she had never seen it. Papers unfiled, correspondence unopened, the inkwell dry because she had not been permitted in to fill it. The Herodotus was open on the desk, face down, its spine cracking. She set the tray beside it and saw that the pages it was open to were not the Persian Wars. They were the pages where he kept her letters. He had been reading them. Perhaps he had been reading them all night. She closed the curtains properly before she left, drew them to the angle that admitted light without glare, the way she had done every morning for a year, and she heard him stir in the chair by the cold grate, and she did not turn around. On the third day, she found a letter he had started and abandoned on his desk. It was addressed to Lady Staverton. It read, "I must know who," and then the sentence ended, and the nib had pressed through the paper, and the letter had been crumpled and smoothed and crumpled again. He had wanted to break the seal of anonymity. He had wanted to find the woman who had written to him, and then he had stopped, because the woman had asked him not to, and she knew this about him, knew it from the letters and from 13 months of watching. A man who kept his word, even when keeping it, cost him everything he wanted. 3 days passed. He reappeared on the 4th morning. He was thinner, or she imagined he was. He sat at his desk and opened his correspondence and read through it with the mechanical attention of a man searching for something he knew would not be there. She set the tea down, silent, steady, 3 feet from his hand, and turned to leave. "Emmeline." She stopped. He had never used her name before. She was not certain he knew it. "The tea," he said. "How long have you been bringing it?" "A year, Your Grace, 13 months. He looked at the cup. He looked at the saucer. He looked at the surface of the tea, where the milk had been stirred to the precise shade he preferred, and something moved across his face, not recognition, not yet, but the shadow that precedes it. 13 months, he repeated, and always at this temperature. "Yes, Your Grace." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you. That will be all." She left. But something had shifted. A pebble had been dislodged from the top of a slope, and it was rolling. Over the following week, he began to notice. She could see it happening, the way a man notices a draft and begins tracing it to its source. On the first day, he looked at the inkwell. He stared at it for a full minute after she set the tea down. The level of the ink filled to precisely the line he preferred, not so full that the nib submerged too deeply, not so shallow that it required pressing. He had mentioned this preference once, in a letter. He had written, "I am particular about ink levels in a way that I suspect reveals something unflattering about my character." He had never spoken the words aloud to anyone in this house. On the second day, it was the curtains. She arrived to find him standing at the window, his hand on the fabric, testing the angle. The light fell across his desk in the precise band he favored, bright enough to read by, narrow enough to avoid glare on the page. He turned when she entered, and his eyes moved from her to the curtains and back again, with the first stirring of a question he had not yet formed. On the third day, the fire. He was crouching at the grate when she entered, the tray steady in her hands, and he was examining the arrangement of kindling. Birch first, then oak, the birch laid in a lattice that caught quickly and burned clean. The oak set above in the configuration he had once described in a letter about winter mornings and the particular comfort of a fire that someone else has laid. He stood when he heard her step, and she saw the question on his face more clearly now, closer to the surface, pressing against the underside of his expression like a word on the tip of a tongue. On the fourth day, the post. He arrived at his desk before she did, earlier than usual, she noted, earlier than he had come to his study in months, and he was sitting in his chair when she brought the tray, and his eyes were on the stack of correspondence, the personal letters on top, the business correspondence beneath, the invitations, which he never accepted but always read, in a separate pile to the left, arranged precisely as he had once described his preference in a letter. He did not speak that morning, but when she turned to leave, she heard him draw a breath, sharp, sudden, involuntary, and she knew the pebble had reached the bottom of the slope. On the fifth day, he pulled the Herodotus from its shelf and opened it, and she knew he was looking at the letters she had written, the ones he had kept tucked inside the cover, and she knew he was looking at the handwriting, and she did not know whether he had ever seen her hand on a household list or a note left for Mrs. Ord. She'd been so careful. But care has limits, and a man who has read 300 pages of a woman's writing knows its rhythm the way he knows a voice. She watched his face change over the course of that week, the way one watches weather build over open country. It was not sudden. It was cumulative. Each small recognition fed the next, and by the sixth day he was sitting at his desk when she arrived with the tray, and his eyes followed her across the room with a quality of attention she had never seen directed at her before. Careful, measuring, as though he were reading a passage he had previously skimmed and discovering it said something entirely different from what he had assumed. On the seventh morning, she arrived to find a letter on the tea tray. It was addressed to her. Her full name, Miss Emmeline Lacey, written in the hand she knew better than any hand in the world, the hand that had described turn migration and moral philosophy and the melancholy of Handel and the larkspur on the south wall. She set the teacup down beside it. Her fingers did not tremble. She had spent a year learning the steadiness, and it held. She opened the letter. "I've been trying to compose this since Tuesday," it read. "I've begun it 11 times. I've ruined more paper this week than in the preceding year. Every version attempts to say the same thing, and every version fails, because the thing I am trying to say is so simple that language keeps overcomplicating it. You planted the larkspur. You knew about the birch and oak. You knew about the Herodotus. I described my mornings to a woman in a letter, and the woman who arranged those mornings read the description and said nothing, and I cannot decide whether I am furious or astonished, or simply the greatest fool who has ever lived in this house, and there have been several." She looked up. He was standing in the doorway. He was not composed. That was the first thing she registered, that the careful, contained man who had occupied this study for 13 months, whose emotions surfaced only in ink, was standing before her with the full weight of discovery on his face and no letter to absorb it into. His hands were at his sides, his breathing was uneven. He looked at her, truly looked, the way he looked at a page that had stopped him, the way he held a sentence that rearranged what he understood, and she felt the gaze as a physical thing, a warmth, a light source. "How long have you known?" he asked. "From the first morning." He closed his eyes. She watched the information pass through him the way a tremor passes through a struck bell, a single, clear vibration that changed the shape of the silence. "A year," he said. "You have stood in this room every morning for a year, knowing who I was, knowing what I wrote to you, knowing—" He stopped. "Why did you not tell me?" She set the letter down on the tray. "Because you were in love with a woman who had time to choose her words," she said. "And I was afraid that the woman standing in front of you would not be enough." The study was quiet. The morning light from the east window fell across the desk, across the tray, across the space between them. "Nanish Emmeline," he said, and her name in his voice was different from every other time he had spoken it. Not a summons, not a function, but a recognition, as though he were hearing it for the first time and understanding that it had been the answer to a question he had been asking for a year. "You are the woman who wrote those letters." "Yes." "You are the woman who plants larkspur and reads Herodotus and knows how I take my tea." "Yes." He took one step into the room, then another. He stood close enough that she could see the crease in the letter he had written, 11 drafts, and the ink on his cuff from the effort. "I was not in love with a woman who had time to choose her words," he said. "I was in love with the words, and the words were yours, all of them, the chosen ones, and the ones you spoke in this room without thinking, and the ones you never spoke at all." He paused. "Including the ones you said to Mrs. Ord at 10:30 last Tuesday, when you thought the corridor was empty, about the south wall needing another season before the wisteria would hold." She stared at him. "You heard that?" "I have been listening," he said quietly, "since I stopped being a fool, which was approximately last Wednesday." She laughed. It came out before she could prevent it, brief, startled, wholly without composure, and his face changed at the sound, softened into something she had never seen in this room, something she recognized from his letters when he wrote about music, or the quality of winter light, and she understood that he was looking at her the way he had always looked at the things that moved him. He did not reach for her hand. He reached for the teacup, still warm, still perfect, and lifted it and drank. And when he set it down, he said, 13 months of this, and I never once tasted it properly until now." They were married in the chapel at Kellingham on a morning in late November when the larkspur had long since faded, but the south wall still held the shape of it, the lattice of stems that would return in spring. Lady Staverton attended, and was heard to remark that this was the finest outcome her letter circle had ever produced, and that she intended to take full credit regardless of the facts. Mrs. Ord stood at the back of the chapel and wept into a handkerchief she had ironed herself that morning, and Ridley, who had never been known to express sentiment of any kind, was observed to smile. The household adjusted with the particular grace that well-run houses manage when the change is welcome. The staff who had called her the study girl now curtsied and called her Your Grace, and if some of them found the transition remarkable, none found it surprising. Mrs. Ord had known or suspected or assembled the truth from fragments the way a woman of her experience assembles anything, quietly, completely, without requiring confirmation. She continued to run the household with the same precision she had always shown, and if she addressed the new Duchess with a warmth that exceeded the professional, Emmeline did not correct her. Hugh changed, not dramatically. He was not a man built for dramatic change, but in the small, accumulating ways that matter more. He looked at the people in his household. He learned the footman's name, and the kitchen maid's, and the gardener's boy who had helped Emmeline with the larkspur. He began taking his meals in the breakfast room instead of the study, and when Emmeline joined him, he set down his correspondence and looked at her, every morning, without exception, and the looking was not perfunctory. It was the deliberate, sustained attention of a man who had learned, at considerable cost, what inattention could waste. When he took his seat in the House of Lords for the winter session, he wrote to her from London every evening. The letters arrived at Kellingham by the morning post, and Emmeline read them at the breakfast table where she now sat as Duchess in the same chair from which she could see the south wall through the window, and she wrote back before noon so that her reply would reach him by evening. The distance was bearable because the letters bridged it, as they had always bridged every distance between them. He wrote to her still, even when they were together. That was the part that surprised the household and did not surprise Emmeline at all. Letters appeared on her breakfast plate, on her pillow, tucked into the spine of whatever book she was reading. Short ones, mostly, a line about the light, a question about the garden, an observation about something she had said at dinner that he was still considering 3 hours later. She replied in kind. They lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, sat across from each other at every meal, and the letters continued, because the letters had been the first language between them, and neither wished to lose it. Their son was born the following autumn, in the bedchamber overlooking the south wall, on a day when the last of the larkspur was still holding its color against the limestone. Hugh held him in the study where the tea tray still arrived each morning. Emmeline no longer carried it, but she had trained the girl who did, and the temperature was always correct, and wrote a letter to the child that he placed in the Herodotus beside the first letter Emmeline had ever sent him about Arctic terns. "Your mother," he wrote, "was standing 3 feet from me for a year, and I looked at her every morning and did not see her. And this is the most important thing I will ever teach you, that the person who changes your life may already be in the room, and the only thing required of you is the willingness to look up." Gideon Lacy Astley, who would in time become the 8th Duke of Kellingham, would find this letter at the age of 19, tucked between a passage on the Persian Wars and a 6-page treatise on the migratory habits of Arctic terns, and would read it standing at the same desk where his mother had once set a teacup down without making a sound, and would understand. The south wall held the larkspur every summer. The wisteria, as Emmeline had predicted, took another season, but it held. It always held. They arrive here, like a letter found between familiar pages, whenever they are ready.